Known as Vetson. Some of you may have encountered him on Pound Swift. If so, I'm sorry. But he used to be a part of Swift. Did you hold an e-board position? No. No, he was so awesome that it sort of just permeated the ranks. He didn't feel the need to lower himself to leadership.
Plus, I didn't pay dues.
Well, paying dues, right? Yeah, that's a problem. So, but yes, he used to be part of Swift, and now does some pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to let him introduce himself as far as what he does. So we give him a warm welcome.
A lot of people here for this meeting. That's cool. When I was in Swift, it was not. So my name's Matthew. I used to go to Cal Poly here, CIS major. I graduated in 2009, I guess. That makes me feel kind of old.
I was born in 2009.
Yeah. And before this, before my current job, I worked at Boeing for a few years as a software engineer, and now I work at a company called Accuvant, and I'm an application security pen tester, I guess. So I'm a security consultant, and I'm just here to kind of talk about a little bit about security work in general, web app security. Just kind of free form, so if you guys have like any questions or want to know anything, like just please yell at me, interrupt me, raise your hand, whatever. If you're interested. If not, just sit there and stare at me blankly. To cover like some of the topics about, I guess, security work in general, is like reverse engineering positions, and so there's actual work out there for people that do reverse engineering. They will pay you to do it. And most of this is for just finding malware. And so a lot of people will find things in their network and they wonder, like, what is this? Do I care? Who do I have to, punch in the face? Application security, this is what I do. This pretty much just means like anything software related or running on the internet. Network penetration, this is kind of your classic hacker. I'm gonna get domain admin kind of thing. Forensic and incident response, you've probably seen Jeff in here before talking about it. That's, what's on my hard drive, what did they do, let's read some chat logs. And just research and exploit data, and that's more the pointed attack side of work. And you can find work doing this kind of stuff if that's your interest, but it's a little bit harder. So the kind of people that would pay for this kind of work, mostly defense contractors, like private corporations with something to lose, and government. Government being like anywhere from three-letter agencies to whatever. I'm sure you guys have seen in the news lately how they're just like, oh no, China hacking stuff. Defense contractors, because who works for the government really, and private corporations, it's pretty much if you have money to lose. Like if you have, say you're a bank, you don't like the idea of someone taking your mobile application and then stealing tons of money. And paid to make sure that doesn't happen. There's also the laws involved, like HIPAA, PCI, compliance stuff. So a lot of that kind of stuff you'll see go through. And publicity is a pretty big thing. Like you have your website get popped, and all of a sudden, like you said, like Iranian hackers kind of own you or something as your main page for 3 days. People generally don't like that. I don't know how to use the computer. Network penetration. This is probably one of the most common kind of security-related jobs you'll find out there. I don't know how many of you are familiar with CCDC, but that's kind of pretty much what the red team does in CCDC. So network pen type stuff. It's a little less, I don't know, movie-esque than you might see in like CCDC or anything like that. But this means like showing up to a client site, usually wearing some shirt with buttons, and then just kind of trying to take over the network. They can get more boring, and people just want to look at singular things, or it can go up like, we give you like a VM in our enclave, like, what can we do? And so the kind of skill set here is very varied, but in the end the goal is kind of the same. It's just control their stuff, be better sysadmins than them in one way, that kind of thing. Reverse engineering, so kind of touch this a little bit. This is like a data loss prevention group might send you like a PDF and they go, well, what happened? Like, what is this? Like, we found this on the computer, we want to know who put this here, if you can, like, what did it do? Did it take any information? Is it still there? How do we detect it? How do we stop it at the border, that kind of stuff. And so, you take your PDF, you rip it apart, and you find out what kind of exploits it might be using. You might write signatures for it, or help write signatures to detect them. You'll find out what the payloads do, how it spreads, that kind of stuff. And sometimes you'll find new things, a lot of the times you won't. So this is the kind of stuff you see in the news where they say, oh, we found this really advanced malware or something like that, that messes up centrifuges in a power plant. This is, I mean, that's like obviously the high profile. Most of the stuff is just going to be like PDFs trying to get your bank account or something, but some of the skills involved in that are just being able to read code well, and by code I mean like all of it, like assembly all the way up, and just kind of using your ability to program to unprogram. Forensics and incident response. Usually this is the kind of job that you're going to be working with law enforcement, doing legal type stuff, figure out what happened. I don't do it. And exploit development, that's a niche field, I guess, but you'll find it around and pretty much just exploit stuff and then sell it. People will buy it, will make money. That's cool. So, application security. To sum up application security in general, it's pretty much a software, right? But what I see is anything operating over the internet or pretty much anything using HTTP. Every website you use uses HTTP, obviously. Pretty much almost anything on your phone, all this other stuff, uses it. So what I see a lot are Android and iOS applications. So people using phones, they want to know, like, how does this work? What can we steal? Does the information stay private? They're worried about rootkits, or not rootkits, or like Android malware type stuff stealing. If you use a phone and you have a bank account on there, can they log in and mess with your stuff? Are the API secure, that kind of thing. A lot of source code reviews and black box reviews, I guess. So in application security, there's two types of tests usually. That's like, here's a website. Is it broken? Here's a link, blah, blah, blah. And here's the source code to that website also. The second type. More useful, but you get to read someone's bad or good code and then break it. And a lot of what you see is also web services. So I don't know if you guys have heard of like things like SOAP services or REST, anything like that. Just APIs, like think Twitter's API. So HTTP is pretty ubiquitous these days. You'll find it almost anywhere, mostly in things you won't even expect. Any website you browse, like almost any application on your phone, minus like 2 or 3 things, you'll probably just be using HTTP. Like your TVs use them. Pretty much any device that has those fancy GUIs. APIs, and I don't know, you'll probably find something else really easy. So who here is actually familiar with HTTP in general? Like, you know what it is? You dug into it, looked at it? Yeah. So this is what like a standard actual request would look like. I'm not sure if you've ever dug into it before, but HTTP is a layer 7 protocol, all ASCII, or mostly ASCII, I guess. You can move by here there, but pretty simple, pretty robust, I guess, and kind of old. But it works well. So, moving on. Kind of things you might find. There's a list online called OWASP Top 10. If you're interested in researching vulnerabilities or trying to find out what you could do, just Google OWASP Top 10, and it'll show you what you want to know. But here's an example, a response from like a self-service with SQL injection. So SQL, guys want to know about SQL injection? That kind of stuff? About actual vulnerabilities?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the types of attacks you might find commonly in like a web application is SQL injection. You've probably heard of it. You might not know exactly what it is, but the long story short is you mess up how something parses a string, and that string, in this case, is a SQL statement. And so if you mess up the parsing of a SQL statement, you might be able to influence what happens. So this is an example where I modified a field and you just like insert like a tick in there because SQL is, a tick in SQL is reserved characters. And you might see something like this, just like there's a syntax error somewhere in your SQL statement, like why no tick right here. You should fix that. Some of the common tools to help find this kind of stuff are things like Burp Proxy, Charles Proxy for AMF. SQL Math is pretty cool, Firebug, scripting languages. It's pretty straightforward as far as everything you need.
What does a proxy do?
Yeah, I was actually going to show one right now. I have a proxy open, see if I can get it to fit on this screen. It disappeared.
OS X, it just works.
Doesn't it? I know. This is my work laptop. I don't know how to feel about OS X, but the laptops are pretty nice. See, that worked, right?
How are you?
If we could find a goat real quick to sacrifice to the devil gods. A goat to sacrifice.
Hey, leave the goats alone.
Yay, live demos.
Yeah. What is this thing, like 800 by 600 resolution? Doesn't even full screen. Hold on. I got this, I got this. Well, no,
Experimental?
Set them up.
Experimental?
Or run them.
Shouldn't be that hard.
What are you doing? Changing screen resolution on what?
Because mine went just one second.
Use a lot.
Xrender.
Yeah, there's only one setting in the file. So if you change it, it says that setting is not applicable. It doesn't exist.
That's weird.
Bam.
alright, at least we can see the same thing.
There's a graphical shell thing that goes over that uses Xrender that I use on my Linux, but it's not Debian. I don't know.
So this is Burp. It's a very, very, very awesome tool. Show you a little bit about just browsing to some websites and intercepting the tools. So, wait, wrong browser. What Burp does, it's a man in the middle for HTTP traffic. And what this means is that every request that you set your browser to proxy through will go first to this program, and then you can either stop, drop, manipulate, change fields, do whatever you want to the request. And so this kind of thing really, really helps you in messing with websites. So say you have a web application with a form that just submits username and password. Maybe for some odd reason they have a third field that says like isAdmin equals false. You normally wouldn't see that with Burp. You might be able to stop it, intercept it, and change that flag to true, and then become an administrator. Not that anyone would probably do that, but it's not outside the realm of possibilities. So here's the request to Google. I can go ahead and forward it and see Google slowly loads. Assuming I actually have internet. That kind of thing. Show you a little bit of security type stuff through this program. I have a slide on it, but this is called Matilde, I think. What this is built by OWASP, and it's a suite just to go through all the different vulnerabilities. Like if you want to learn how to do any kind of web app thing, just start with something like this. Like OpenBurp, start with this, and you can go ahead and look for like SQL injection or cross-site scripting or anything like that. So like a simple one, cross-site scripting. And so this thing goes ahead and says, well, you can do some cross-site scripting on this page. How do you do that? Go ahead and do a test here. And we notice that right here, the input we just put in is reflected right back out to us. We can do like another test, put some special characters in there and see what happens. I'm able to look in my proxy. And we see, this is the response from it, and we see these characters right here. And they are exactly the same as we put them in. And so what XSS is it's called, is XSS stand for? Yeah, there you go. I know what I'm talking about. What it means is being able to execute JavaScript within someone's browser. So you send someone a link and there's like a URL and some junk on it, and they click it, and all of a sudden, like JavaScript that they wrote executes within the browser. That's pretty much getting allowing me to run my code on your computer. Well, JavaScript environments are pretty restrictive and all, and so it's not like they're going to take over the computer. It's not great for the website in question. And so I can modify that and say, well, I know I have these, so why don't I just write a script tag? And so that comes back and you execute some JavaScript. And so that kind of thing is actually extremely common. Not that dangerous as far as web security goes. Like the biggest ones I've seen this on is like I've seen it on Reddit where someone posted XSS and then all of a sudden everyone views like the comment pages and like everyone's comments getting deleted or whatever. I forget what they did. Or like it infects other people. Like you can get this on Facebook. Yeah, XSS worms. Facebook's had it before, and you go through and it just goes across everyone's account. It can spread pretty quickly, and so this stuff is dangerous enough, I suppose. There's, does anyone want to know more about XSS? Is that a question?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
So how does it work? Because it runs on the client browser, right? Not like on the host is doing it, or is
Yeah.
it running on the host?
So one thing, JavaScript is always parsed client side, and so like every browser is going to have a JavaScript engine. If you can arbitrarily provide JavaScript running under the context of their domain, and so when I say running under the context of their domain, I mean JavaScript has like a sandboxing ability to like kind of access only the domain that it was run from, and so when it knows that I'm on 127.0.0.1, it'll load the JavaScript and I have access to everything under that domain only.
Right.
and I won't have access to like, other stuff. And so if I, as an attacker, somehow get my own JavaScript to run or be served by this domain, I can have it run in someone's browser under that domain and kind of steal information. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you have to be connected to it in order for, let's say, a victim, or do we want to process, right? Or
Yeah. Let me see if I can do this real quick to show you screens. It doesn't work in this case because it's a post, but say I could actually supply the JavaScript. This is pretty common, even though this example doesn't support it. I can just put the JavaScript right here in the URL. And so if I send you an email to this website with the link, it would still say, you know, like the same domain name. But now all of a sudden I have my own code just injected right into it. And so that's why
But it's
kind of
buried
like,
so far in that no one's gonna ever notice it.
hopefully, yeah. Like you wouldn't read it, and if you encode it and stuff, you're like, oh, it's just a junk URL. Like who reads like the 50,000 lines on the Broadway Director even, you know? Oh, maybe you two do. Those of us with no free time. So, here's that. Here, why don't we do SQL injection? Register. That one's hard. Too many fields. Hold on. Let's do. Alright. So keep in mind I've never actually used this toolkit. I just installed it like 5 minutes ago, so this may not go so great. So I'm testing this little application here, and I want to know if this is SQL injectable. Well, I obviously do know, but by default, like I can just go ahead and do this request, and this is what goes through. Let's go. Submits, you know, your username and your password. So action.
Clear text.
And it tells me I have a bad username or password. So we can try other things like, well, username with a ticket. You can see the tick rate here as encoded. Oh, something interesting happened. And so right here you see stack trace from the SQL statement right here, and it says, oh, some pass, yeah. And it's a little confused why you have an extra tick statement in there, and so we might be able to go back and say, modify the SQL statement.
Save your password.
Turn that off. And
I always
Yeah, there
leave
it is.
the most verbose.
Yeah, that's true. No, it should have gone with is this my SQL?
Oh, yeah.
Hold on. Here, I'll do it in the password. So we say we want to know admin and password. But as you can see, I'm slowly modifying the SQL statement that the backend is making. Can you guys read that? Yeah. So originally, it would just put your little username in here, your password here, and that would be the end of the statement. I specifically injected this part, and so what the goal of this would be is, if you're selecting, making a SQL statement, looking at where user is equal to something and password is equal to something, usually you're only going to return one result of that, where it returns true. But you can also modify the statement to say, or pretty much true. And so always have this statement return true with a true result. And so in that way you can kind of like bypass the whole that did work. So, with correct modification of it, I logged in as the username admin and selected all the users, or I don't even think I logged in, I think I just selected every username from the database. So, that would be an example of SQL injection. This actually, as far as most of the jobs that I do, I probably find it a good 25% of them, which is kind of absurdly high. And it's one of the worst because once you get access to the database like this, like MS SQL, in some circumstances will let you do command injection, command execution via some modules. You can dump databases, dump passwords, dump if they have credit card data, that's very bad. You can sometimes get into other things, you know, escalate from there. So interesting, fun, happens often enough.
So can you explain how you would prevent that
Prevent?
from happening?
Oh, that's probably a good thing to cover, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, let's actually have a source for this, user info. So, right here is how they're constructing that SQL statement. And if you know PHP, pretty much what this is just string concatenation. And so you're just doing one string plus another string plus another string. And then you are executing the SQL statement. So it constructs the entire statement here, and then just says execute query. And so SQL injection is common where you construct a string and then pass it to the parser. Because you can then manipulate how the parser will interpret the string based off of how they construct it. The most common way, and probably one of the best methods of protecting about this, is called parameterized queries. If you've done SQL programming before, you've probably seen like the API for that. I suggest if you've done SQL programming and don't know about it, you look it up. And that allows you to use the SQL engine itself to insert parameters safely. And so just you have something like sec star from accounts where username equals and then you'd be able to replace those two question marks via the parameterized queries with your actual values. That would stop the injection and that'd be good. There's also things that like filter inputs, that kind of stuff. Like if you're using numbers, just make sure it's a number for first, whitelist your data, that kind of stuff. A lot of steps you can take to kind of make sure that someone just can't freeform and kill the database and web app. So, any questions on SQL injection? Is that cool?
How did you actually do that, the SQL injection? What did you inject the SQL into?
What did I inject my SQL into?
Yeah.
Well, here, the original, I make the request via the browser, right? And so this is actually the HTTP request that the browser makes and sends to the web server. My web server is running locally. I'm running Apache with MySQL, and this is a PHP site. So it's on 127.0.0.1, as you can see when I browse to it. And so I send that request to the browser, or the web server. The web server finds out what page it's asking for and passes it down to this PHP script. So it's literally this script right here. And so the PHP script says, okay, I'm going to pull the parameters out of the URL. I'm going to then construct with those this SQL statement, and then I'm gonna execute my SQL statement against a MySQL database that is hooked up to. So the script itself has the ability, or knows where my database is, and knows the username and password to it. And so it's going a chain from my browser submitting the request and taking those parameters to that script, having that script rip them out, put them into a SQL statement, and that SQL statement's being run on the SQL server itself. Does that make sense? Yeah. I'm being unclear, please just ask. But that's a common example of web security stuff, and this is the kind of stuff you'd probably look for if you wanted to do this job. There's a lot of other things. You can do lots of different types of SQL injection. There's HTML injection, yeah. Command injection, there's cases where you'll find that you can actually execute system commands on websites by modifying parameters. I think this one in particular, yeah. So, can anyone guess what this might be doing? And this is on Windows, if that helps. Yeah, so it's pretty much, this is just running NSLOOKUP and then the input you gave it. And so what kind of things might you be able to do if you messed with the input parameter?
You could maybe give
But,
it
so
flags.
you could probably do like some sort of injection of commands. Like in Windows, when you have like a semicolon, you might create another statement and be able to execute commands, that kind of thing. I'm not going to bother trying to demo this one because I failed at it earlier. Not usually. It doesn't work. I tried it earlier. Oh, it helps me. Look at that. Yeah, it pretty much tells me to use semicolon. Anyway. What else is there? This is exciting. No, it doesn't. Never mind. So I'll just go over some of these, what these are. SQL injection, you just saw an example of it, very common. Almost every website is probably powered by a SQL database, and so you'll find that in a lot of places. Command injection, the ability to just literally execute something from like command prompt or your Linux shell. Not as common, but very fun to get because you could. Websites are the most common thing on the internet. I don't know if that's true actually, but it's one of the most public-facing things on the internet. And so if you're going to get into a company, one of the biggest vectors is probably going to be their exposed website. Because the company doesn't have to necessarily expose very many of its services beyond like a website and some HTTP services or whatever they're doing, and maybe email, if they're doing like mobile email, that kind of stuff. Maybe a few other things, but you see that a lot, and so you're looking at banks, I don't know, things like Verizon. It's all pretty important. I actually worked on a client not too long ago. They were a processor, I guess, they held a lot of credit card information, and they got hit through one of their websites, and as a result of that, pretty much lost their ability to do business for like 4 or 5 months. And so via something pretty simple like SQL injection on a website online, like lost the company several $1 million easily. So stuff's important enough, and it can be very, very damaging to a company, and I think it's advantageous for a user. I don't know if any of these are worth like actually demoing up here. Do you guys have questions or anything like that? I'm just rambling up here. Yeah.
How did your experience in CIS translate to getting you into the career field for software engineering?
I wouldn't say it was actually CIS as much as CCDC. So it was this club, presentations like this, just the people around you. It's just having that interest and then pursuing it and just kind of having the ability to demonstrate that you're into it. Yeah, it is how I got into it. Specifically, I got hired because of CCDC and I was on the team. But it's not like that's the only way to do this. Like, it's just showing that interest, showing a little initiative, I think, and then like just getting out there and going through jobs. I don't know. Like, does that make? Yeah. So in my case, it doesn't work for everyone, but I mean, my company's hiring, and if you can do this, I don't care if you have a degree. Like, we'll hire you. Like, so if you know what you're doing, like, it doesn't matter. And so this stuff is not that hard. You can just go online. The Burp is free. This toolkit is free. And if you know how all of these work, you can do this job pretty much. Probably. And read some source code. You should probably know how to read code. Maybe write a little bit, but I think that'll come naturally if you're doing this kind of stuff. Anyone else?
So what about a company that hosts its website through a third party? You can't get into that company's website or into their server, right?
Well, it wouldn't be the company server then, I guess. Very rarely do people just kind of like cloud their systems, but even if they do, it's their data you're after, and if they have a website with data, you still have access to it even if it's hosted externally. So I guess that's decently common, but then anything under the purview of that app is yours anyway if you break it at least. It's not like you're going to get a domain admin from their website or something, but at that point. Like, I've seen a lot of companies, they do, there's application servers that run that allow you to just execute code and they run them as root. And all of a sudden you just like get root access to this server hosting like 50 things and you're like, okay. See my presentation, anything else? Slide.
Yeah, what slide is loading?
So tools, Burp Proxy is what I just showed you. Go check that out online if you're interested. Things like Charles Proxy, another free, it does the same thing. It's a bit uglier, a bit clunkier, but it works better on some things. You could use this kind of stuff with like your phone too. Like if you want to mess with an Android application, you could set that up to go through your Burp Proxy and then watch traffic go in and out and see what it does. Do it with iOS pretty easily too. Yes. I think you need a jailbroken phone for that one, but SQL Map, very cool tool. So if you're like me and kind of suck at SQL injection, this thing will do like the most amazing things ever. If you just like point it at like this web app, I'm sure it'll like dump the entire database. You know, like if you have a SQL injection that doesn't actually return results, it can like guess things in the database and find out users and execute commands and let you do cool stuff. Use it wisely. Yeah. Firebug is just a Firefox plugin, very cool. I'll show you in that, won't even bother. Just look at web pages, you can modify your cookies, that kind of stuff. Scripting language. Oh, yeah. Here's an example of XSS on Google that someone found, not me, but this kind of thing, kind of dangerous. Like if you have XSS on Google, maybe they'll steal your cookies or something, or get your session or make you friends with, I don't know, the president. So Matilda, that's the piece of software I just had up. There's WebGo, which is pretty good for this web stuff. If you want to just get into other forms of security in general, like check out Smash the Stack, it's very cool. And Google for some CTF events, you'll find tons of really cool stuff that will maybe get you started if you're interested or not, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I have.
guys, thanks for coming. If you're going to Scale, then hang around for a bit. Crizzles has some stuff that he wants to talk to you about, so go ahead and I guess come up to the front. Otherwise, we will see you next week.